Latest statistics on rape and sexual assault in the United States by the FBI and the Department of Justice show that by the age of 19, 95% of sexual assault victims are female, and across the United States, 99% of rape perpetrators are male. On college campuses, somewhere between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 college women are raped during their college years.
Often men are in positions of power and women will be harassed in those circumstances. So you can ask the question, where in those contexts would emotional intelligence play in that could stop the harassment? If we think about emotional intelligence as being able to understand and regulate or control our own emotions and that of others, emotional intelligence for regulating their own emotion should reduce the harassment. So emotion is about preparing us for action. When we're afraid, we get ready to run. When we're angry, we're ready to fight, all that stuff. And some people are much more inclined to act on that impulse, to immediately run when they're afraid, to immediately fight when they're angry. Emotional intelligence should be able to allow people to not react on the emotional impulse. For instance, for perpetrators, to the extent that they have poor impulse control, do they fear that if they don't really put out a dominant sort of image, that they won't be able to maintain their status? I think about a talk that I saw recently where there were 3 male panelists and 1 female panelist, and the female really had trouble being able to find a space to talk. Men just kept talking, and the men were often on different sides of issues, and so I attributed part of that to be feeling the need to win.
The Me Too and Time's Up movements have focused a lot on Hollywood, and having spent 5 years working in Hollywood, I did experience and witness the male hostility toward women. What we're seeing now with, starting maybe back with Bill Cosby, and most notably with Weinstein, and with many, many others that have come out since then, I think it's in the hundreds now, is really still in a lot of ways the tip of the iceberg. Knowing that the numbers of cases that go unreported shows us that with the strength in numbers of women's voices coming forward, we're still only seeing a little bit of what's really happening, and that gives more credence to listening to women and believing women, because this is not just one woman coming forward. This is many women who have similar stories corroborating each other. Unfortunately, if we look at a lot of the justice systems in our country, and even looking at the Academy that votes on the Oscar movies every year, they are still vastly majority male, white, and typically older adults. So we're seeing the older white males who are still maintaining the dominance of these fields, still voting or determining justice for the rest of the community. There needs to be more focus on representation, and not just of women, but intersectionally as well, with different genders and races and ethnic backgrounds. It's so important because until there's representation, society will not lend credence to these voices that need to be heard. Sexual harassment is linked to rape myth acceptance, which is also correlated with rape and sexual assault perpetration. And it's been shown that priming for empathy can actually reduce rape myth acceptance in potential perpetrators, and also reduce the likelihood of rape and sexual assault. So potentially training for empathy and emotional intelligence and being cued into another person's emotional experience could reduce the likelihood of sexual harassment perpetration in the workplace, depending on the type of person that is a potential perpetrator. Recent functional magnetic resonance imaging studies have shown that men and women process empathy in different regions of the brain, such that women process empathy in emotional or affective regions like the amygdala, whereas males process empathy in more cognitive cortices, or areas of the brain related to reasoning or cognitive deduction. So it may be suggested by these studies that men and women empathize in different ways or through different pathways. Empathy training or emotional intelligence training could be beneficial with women if it were coupled with or paired with assertiveness training. It could really help to strengthen the emotional intelligence that seems to already be demonstrated in women in social settings, but also empowering them with skills for asserting themselves in certain situations. Whereas with the men, since they tend to process empathy in more cognitive regions, it could be paired with some factual or objective background on sexual harassment in the workplace and maybe help them understand better the consequences of sexual harassment. In my recently completed master's thesis project, I studied how narcissism influences the impact of an empathy priming procedure on college males and their subsequent rape myth acceptance. And what I found was that in having two groups, an empathy group and an objective group, those in the empathy group who were low on narcissistic traits were actually found to have lower rape myth acceptance than those who were lower in narcissism in the objective group. So that showed that empathy priming, which could be translated to emotional intelligence training, actually decreased rape myth acceptance, which has been correlated with hostility toward women and sexual harassment in the workplace. However, for those in the empathy priming group who were high on narcissistic traits, their rape myth acceptance was actually higher than those in the objective group who were high on narcissism. And this is frightening because what it's showing us is that by asking participants who were college males to be compassionate towards or empathetic towards a victim of rape, their rape myth acceptance was actually increased by that type of priming. So it shows that there's a potential danger of using emotional intelligence training or empathy priming for individuals who are higher in narcissistic traits. People in higher up roles of power, like CEOs, tend to also have high levels of narcissism or even antisocial or psychopathic traits. And those types of personality traits are linked with low empathy. But that's only showing us part of the picture. It may be that they are less motivated to have empathy towards other people, but are actually quite cognitively in tune with other people's experience and are therefore able to manipulate the situation to their advantage. Perhaps if there are programs in workplaces or on college campuses that are geared towards priming for empathy or training emotional intelligence, there should be some sort of screener ahead of time to screen out individuals who are high on narcissistic traits so that the intervention can be applied only to those low on narcissism. And further research really needs to study how to decrease things like rape myth acceptance or sexual harassment proclivities in individuals who are higher on these personality traits like narcissism and antisocial personality.